Hello and welcome to the Band of One podcast. I am Riley Wilson, and this podcast is designed for anybody that wants to start or maintain or grow a solo performer business. I'm going to include tips that I've learned in my over 50 years of live performance experience, as well as that of other working professionals who've done that in their neck of the woods. My hope is to make this actionable and fun and something you can use right away to earn more money. Let's get started. Today I have a guy that has a lot to do with me being a solo performer, and he didn't even know it. Welcome, my buddy Brad Richard.
Hi, Riley.
How are you?
Good. You?
I'm doing just great. Let me back up a little bit. One of the things that I don't talk about very often on this podcast is I had a writing career. I backed into a job writing for Gig magazine back in 1987 when my wife and I and our small family had moved from Los Angeles back to Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'd graduated high school and went to college. And anyway, wrote for Gig magazine for about 4 years. Did some reviews in vintage guitar. Had a column called The Gig Meister from 1992 to 2004 or 5 with Gig magazine, with vintage guitar. And I would get stuff from people from time to time, just random things. For example, I got a thing called a Praxer or a Praxit thing, which is basically a little piece of wood that had 6 strings that you could practice right-hand technique with. It worked really well. It kind of annoyed me, but it was a great piece of kit, as the Brits say. And I also got a package from this fellow up in Minnesota. Yeah. And
Minnesota.
Brad was doing a solo gig and was very organized about it. He'd gone about it the right way. He was a working professional. This was 20 years ago. So one of the main guys that I wanted to have on this podcast is Brad. And so I'm excited you're here, my friend.
I'm looking forward to it.
Well, let's begin at the beginning. Kind of what took you down the musical path? If you go back to being a child, I'm assuming you started something as a child that was musical, right?
Oh, yeah. Mom wanted me to start taking piano lessons at 8. And it turned out I had a knack for it. So I've been just playing music ever since.
Okay, so the next question I was going to ask before we had that little technical snafu is when you learned to play piano, were you learning to read music even back at age 8?
I was supposed to be. I've just never gotten really good at reading music. And partly because I've always had, or well, not so much anymore, but I used to have an excellent memory. And so I would uh, ask my piano teacher to just play through whatever song I was supposed to learn that week, so I could get the feel of it. And I'd watch what he did. And by the time next week rolled around, I was playing it like a pro.
You know what's so interesting about this? My buddy Freddie Tripp in South Carolina told me the identical thing is that he was supposed to be reading. And here's the thing. I'm finding with so many of you all that I profiled that are out of my area. You're up in Minnesota, I'm now in Texas, and Freddie was in the Carolinas. I'm finding that as I do this, almost everybody ends up having like that musical ability, that innate ability that just kicks in, and all of a sudden you're getting it and you're not necessarily reading it.
Yeah, that's very
Did you
true.
did you find that to be true in your case?
Yeah, and he kind of finally suspected that something was up. And at one lesson, he took a piece of sheet music and put it in front of me and said, "Play it." And it was just all thumbs. It was bad. So then I had to admit to him that I couldn't read music. I mean, I can read it, but I can't just read it like a book.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're 8 years old. How long were you continuing piano lessons, Brad?
Boy, that goes back a ways. I suppose till I was about 15.
Okay. So you're doing this the
Uh,
tail end of elementary school, junior high school for you and I into senior high, maybe a little bit.
yeah,
Okay, cool.
and then I be, I beat a neighbor girl at basketball and beat her out of an old Sears Silvertone flat top, and then that was off and running with that. I just started teaching myself how to play
Oh, you
because
ruthless
something it was something I could do by myself. When I played the piano, it was down in the family room, and I don't know. I had 6 brothers and sisters, and at least a few of them always got sick of whatever I was playing because I'd played it for the 500th time. so I could hide out in my bedroom and play my guitar.
So here's the question, pal. When did you have this fateful basketball game where you won the
I
guitar?
was 15, I believe.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. All
yep.
right. Did the girl have a crush on you, by the way?
No, no, she is just a neighbor girl. We were friends.
But you turned that into the second instrument. Now, I'm assuming that you had just done piano from 8 till about 15 when you get the guitar. Is that right?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So when you started the guitar, obviously you've been playing for ear for 7, 8 years on the
yeah.
piano. How
Hmm.
much of what you were able to do were you able to transition from piano to the guitar?
Well, I could hear the notes, so I just picked things out, and it's at first it was very basic, just single string melodies. But it was fun because I could play uh things I was hearing on the radio. I mean, I couldn't really play them, but I could play the melody, and it was stuff I wanted to listen to,
Yeah.
and
Would
that
it be
kept me
safe to say
motivated.
this is the 60s?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay. Okay, good.
mid 60s.
Okay, cool. Which was a marvelous time. That's when I got started in guitar personally myself. Was after bugging my parents for a year or two. Finally started lessons in January of 1966. Now that's the next question. Did you ever take lessons on the guitar?
No, I never did.
Okay.
Uh, I kind of I wish I had, but back then it wasn't as easy as it is today. Of course, with the internet, and I don't I guess I don't even know of anybody that gave lessons back then in my area, but I didn't really look for it. I just kind of holed up in my room and started learning.
One of the things that I think a lot of young people that learn the guitar in 2023 or beyond do is that they go immediately to the internet and they try and get an expert to show them what's going on, and they don't spend any time digging for it. You and I both spent a lot of time digging, didn't we?
Hmm. That's all there was. Play back records and try to slow the speed down to try to figure out what the heck they were doing.
Yeah.
And the fidelity wasn't all that great back then, especially the record player we had.
Oh,
So
sure.
it was a challenge.
Well, this was the era of the portable record player, right? And you put a
Well,
45 single in there, or if you had the money, you had an album, right?
yeah, yeah. And I remember one song I really wanted to learn was Train Kept a Comin' by the Yardbirds.
Yeah.
But the fidelity was so bad, I didn't even realize there was a harmonic in there. So I was trying to play both the harmonic and guitar parts on the guitar and finally threw up my hands because I couldn't do it.
Well,
I
we'll
figured I just,
revisit. I want to revisit that a little bit later because I think that kind of has an interesting boomerang in your story, but more about that in a bit. Now, if you're playing guitar and you can play the piano, were you singing at this time too?
no.
Okay.
Uh, and the reason being, when I hate to admit this, but I think I was about 16 or so. I was in a little band. We weren't much good, but we started drinking some whiskey before one show, and I was fairly drunk when we got started. And I tried singing, I forget what song, and I was so embarrassed afterwards. Somebody said I sounded like Donald Duck, and that was it. I didn't sing after that, period. It
Wow.
it was very traumatic.
I think most of us that have had those experiences, I had a very interesting one personally, where a band I was working with in North Carolina, I recorded a show after I'd had a beer or two, maybe. And anyway, I sounded horrible. And I never ever played after having drunk anything. In fact, I've been a teetotaler for over 40 years. But I only mention that because there are times when, if you add alcohol and or other substances to the mix, you may not be happy with the final product. Would you agree?
You're right there. It's been about 40 years for me too. 45.
So, but here's the thing: you end up being a solo performer, but I get the impression you didn't do that right out of high school.
No,
So,
no.
so kind of take me out of high school. You can play the guitar. You're playing in a band with some buddies. You're like my first band; it was pretty mediocre. And so, where did it go from there?
Well, I went off to college in 1967
Okay.
to the University of Florida, which had in-state tuition, which my dad liked, and it was also rated the number one party school in the country by Playboy that year or the year before. So I was all for it. And we partied. It was my music. I always had a guitar and I always played, but I didn't play with anybody. I didn't get in any bands or anything. So it was,
you'll have to help me out here because I noticed it said you live in the upper Midwest. Did you grow up in Florida then?
oh yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cool. The reason I asked that is that yes, Florida was a big party school, and I happened to be in a band with a couple of guys that actually had spent time in Vietnam, and so I'm sure that it was probably as that got a little bit further into your college career, that became sort of an issue. So you have to either do really well in school or you're overseas, right?
Well, you have to do at least well enough not to get booted out.
Yeah.
And that was kind of where I was. I was not a good student. I was sick of school. I wanted to get out there because, in the 60s, the economy was really booming
Yes.
and there was just opportunities everywhere. And I was tired of being broke. But with Vietnam hanging over our heads, it made for some tough decisions.
Yeah, it was a very different time. Put this in perspective, a Telecaster guitar, an American-made Telecaster guitar in 1968, I could have bought at a music store in Farmington, Michigan, brand new for $215.
Yep.
Gasoline was 30 cents a gallon.
Well, that's the thing. I couldn't afford that. I
Yeah.
always played kind of second rate electric guitars because I couldn't afford a Strat.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. You have this acoustic guitar, and then at some point you decide I want an electric guitar. So what did you get?
Well, I started off with a transducer thingy on my acoustic, and
Interesting.
I really liked the sound, so I ended up buying a I don't know what it was, Harmony, an arch top like an ES 335,
Yeah.
white, sharp. Didn't sound that great, but it was sharp.
Yeah.
But it was second rate. It didn't have, the pro qualities.
No, no, I get it. So you're in Florida, you're doing well enough to get by, you're going to the Gatorville and partying and having fun with people. Where did that lead you musically? What'd you end up doing after that?
Well, I left Florida and left most of my music stuff behind, left it with friends, and was traveling out west with some friends and came up here to Minnesota on the way back to visit relatives. This is where my dad is from. I got a ton of relatives. I just liked it and I stayed. Been here ever since,
Cool.
which you don't usually hear people moving from Florida to Minnesota, but for me it was a good move.
That's great. That's great.
And
You've been in the Gopher State ever since, right?
yes,
Fantastic. Well, where did the music part of things? How did follow me with your music? Did you, for example, did you just did you graduate from college and then just get a traditional job during the day, business wise? Kind of help me out and help follow where
yeah,
that goes.
actually I got a 353 draft lottery number, and that pretty much ended my college career because I was not going to Vietnam. And so then I always had a guitar and just played, not necessarily electric, usually just an acoustic. And that's what I played for a lot of years. In fact, in 1977, a good friend of mine down in Texas uh, got me a Takamine F360S, which was a D28 clone,
Yep, those are fine
perfect
guitars.
clone, and sent it up to me. I paid him for it, but I've still got it. That's my acoustic guitar I've had ever since. And that's what I played for a lot of years.
Tell me about the gigs after you moved to Minnesota. What kind of gigs are you playing? Or are you playing gigs? And when did that
None.
start?
Nope. That started actually about, I don't know when it was, 20 years ago. God, it could have been already. My dad was in a nursing home south of the Twin Cities. And I was having lunch with one of my brothers. And he said, I, uh, I was down there and some dude got up with an electric guitar and started playing and everybody loved it. He said, you could do that. And I thought about it for a little bit and I thought, yeah, I probably could because I had just started getting back into it. Uh, I bought a made in Mexico Strat, which was a nice guitar. And the problem was when I was younger, I was a blues guitarist. And then when I was older, I mean, when I started playing again electric, I started looking for like blues jams and stuff. But they just didn't fit at all because they started like around 8 o'clock. They were in smoky bars and it just exactly the opposite of what I needed. And because I was a recovering alcoholic, I didn't need to be in smoky bars, and it was getting kind of late anyway. So then when my brother mentioned this guy at this nursing home, I mean, it just fit because, there's no smoking, no drinking, no cussing, and they go to bed about the same time as me. So it worked out like a champ and great. I'm the best audience you could ever have. They just really appreciated anybody being there. And if you were any good at all, they really appreciated it. So I've had nothing but fun with that ever since.
One of the
I've done a
things
lot
that
of
I think
community
was
shows.
one of the things I think is really interesting is that you mentioned being a blues player. I guess take me from the time that you end up in Minnesota. You're just playing blues for your own amusement. Did you ever play with
Yeah,
any other musicians? So,
no,
in other words, when you started the solo act, you really just started cold from just never having performed before. I'm going to go down there and play at the nursing home.
yeah,
Wow.
yep.
This is really inspirational, I think, to a lot of our podcast listeners and viewers because a lot of folks that have listened to this have thought, you know what, I can sing a little bit or I can play a little bit, but I've never done this before. And
Hmm.
so take me through once you start doing this kind of what you did to develop this act. I was very impressed.
Well, what I
Everything you ended
did,
up doing.
the first one I did was at a nursing home in Chisago City here, and I was so nervous, and I hadn't sung since that night I got drunk to speak of. And so I go in there with an acoustic guitar and no microphone, and I'm playing along, and nobody can hear me because I'm trying, I don't want to be heard. And so the next time I played, I went there, same setup, but the one of the nurses dragged a microphone over and stuck it in front of me so they could hear something. And amazingly enough, nobody ran screaming from the room holding their ears. And, then I got some confidence that, well, I guess I can carry a tune and nobody's throwing anything at me. So yeah, maybe I can do this. And that's where it got going. Then I started putting together a more sophisticated show.
Let me talk about that for just a moment to our podcast listeners and viewers. One of the things, as I said, I would occasionally, as a staff writer at Vintage Guitar Magazine, be sent stuff. And Brad sent me this package that I got to tell you was impressive. You had a whole list of people that you were performing for, a list of contacts, the song list, the places that you performed, a CD or cassette, or a whole bunch of stuff. It sounds like to me you have a significant business background because nobody like myself who'd been playing professionally for years would have thought to do any of the things that you did. So tell me how that came about, Brad.
Well, I've guess I've been in sales most of my life, and I've
Okay.
owned businesses and started businesses, small ones. And it just seemed like it made sense to do that. I needed to make a demo. I started off just going on the internet and trying to find songs that are played in nursing homes. I didn't know yeah, who knows? So once I started making my list of songs off the internet, then I started developing backing tracks. And that was the performance side of it. Then the marketing side of it was basically walk into a nursing home and meet with the activities director and say, "Do you want some music?" I play music. I play all kinds, guitar, bring all my equipment, and we'll have fun. And so that's what I started doing, and it really, really went well. I enjoyed it. The people enjoyed it, and that's what mattered. And I made a few bucks, but it was mostly just fun.
Well, you know, one of the things I've talked with my wife about this a lot recently because the last couple of years I've become incredibly busy, and I do probably I do a fair amount of retirement facilities and nursing homes, and I think one of the things that's gratifying about that is that if you enjoy what you do at all, they pick up on it. And
Hmm.
this is a group of people that starve for entertainment,
Yep.
um, and because they're starved for entertainment, they are very appreciative. It's not a business that you're going to make a fortune. However, most shows are only an hour. And so
Right.
it's typically, at least my experience, it's a pretty doable gig, particularly if you have flexibility during the day. I want to go back to
Yeah.
material for a moment because, as I said, I was kind of impressed with a lot of the things that you had done. Just give me a half a dozen titles of songs that you would do at these facilities that people like to sing or like to listen to.
Most of it was older stuff. Um, Older like jazz, older country. Um, Hank Williams, always a big hit, and some really old stuff from the early 1900s, and just kind of a smash. What I did is I picked out a whole lot of the best that were ever made, best songs ever, and started learning them. And basically, if I liked it, I played it. If I didn't like it, I didn't play it. And but I was able to pick through the cream of the crop from decades before, and it's music that's timeless, so it was great. You know, everybody loved it. They might not listen to it on their own necessarily, but they love listening to it because it's good music.
You know, it's interesting that I've had a lot of the same things. Hank Williams goes over really well for me. Something like an Unforgettable or something like that. Those songs, Unchained Melody, Elvis
Hmm.
Presley stuff always really works well. Um, and I think one of the things that was interesting is that I think the head of the promo that you had on there, Let's Sing. So you
Yeah,
actually encourage your audiences to sing with you, didn't you, Brad?
absolutely. I tried to get them to sing on every song. And I tried to do as many songs as I could that they kind of knew, or some of them knew, and they did sing. You know, I encouraged them, and I told them, listen, you're not going to make me sound any worse. So just go to it. Nobody can tell who's singing what. Just sing, have fun. And that's what we did. And I also told some corny jokes, which always helped too. You got to have some good corny jokes.
Yes, yes, and I think that's important. You know, your background in sales is not to be underestimated, my friend. I think salespeople generally can be a little bit more extroverted, and typically, if they've had experience going in front of people and trying to get somebody to give them their money for something they're trying to sell, I think they
Hmm.
ended up doing well as entertainers. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, well, I would because you've got to have a certain amount of chutzpah to get up and do this thing to start with. And you're on your own. You got to walk in and try to meet an activities director and come off as something uh, more than an amateur and make a good first impression, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got to, yeah, sales. That's what it is. Getting in the door is all sales.
It's absolutely true. Um, and again, as I said, when you started playing these retirement facilities, how long was it before you started getting busy, Brad? Is it
Oh, it
right
didn't take me
away?
long. It didn't take long. Uh, I'd go in and if I had to, I'd do either a free show or a cut rate show. And I'd always ask for referrals too, or I'd just tell people, hey, just finished playing at such and such a place. Give Marjorie a call or give Joni a call or whoever it was. Just that kind of marketing. And I was sure enough of myself that I guess it came off okay. But the main thing is just, if like I say, if I had to, I'd tell them I'll do a show for free to show you what I've got. I'm not afraid to do that. And so, if you'll do it for free, it's easy to get gigs.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
And I always got, that always opened the door
Yeah. That's interesting
until
because in the
after
sales,
a while I just didn't need to. Uh I was actually getting calls for private parties and community events by people that were visiting people in the nursing home when I played.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because a lot of times you think you're playing for a group of people that are 65 and older that are, in the autumn years of their life, let's be kind,
Hmm.
right? And you'd be surprised who comes in there, who listens, and kind of where gigs end up evolving. Did you end up getting some interesting gigs outside of that arena because you
Oh
play well
yeah,
there?
yeah. From staff too. Everybody hears it. I remember one show clearly where I was playing. I don't know what song it was, but anyway, there was a gal visiting her mother. It looked like pretty close to me, so I could hear him. And she was saying, "Oh, Mom, I've got to really get going. I can't stick around." And an hour later, she was still there. So that gave me some more confidence to kind of boost my ego a little bit and keep going.
Well, success certainly begets success, and as I said, you
Yeah.
ended up getting a lot of it. You look back on probably the last 10, 20 years or so when you were playing these events. At one point, what was the busiest? How many shows would you do in a typical week?
Well, once I retired, then I do two or three,
Okay.
usually not too much more than that, partly because there are certain times that are better than others. Like 2 o'clock on a Tuesday.
Yeah.
2 o'clock is the primo time.
Yeah.
Anytime in the evening's getting late,
Yeah.
which is what I like about it. So usually like between 1 and 3 are primo times, and Tuesday was a good day. Wednesday they usually had stuff going on. Sometimes Thursday, and of course holidays like Christmas and stuff. That just was whenever.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. That's interesting. So I've made many of the same discoveries here in Texas. One of the things that I think would be one of the advantages to doing facilities like this, if you can get with a good facility and they pay you regularly and you don't have problems with that. And as I mentioned, I've got a client that I'm over 90 days late on a pay for right now, and we're fighting about that. But most of these places are reliable. You can count on them. I think it's a
Hmm.
good adjunct for somebody that wants to have a solo performing career to have one or two of these in their hip pocket that they can play regularly. There are a couple of advantages that I see. First of all, the repertoire, right? You don't constantly have to be learning new tunes,
Nope.
right? Elvis
No,
Presley's
they
recorded all he's going to do. The Beatles are done making records, and so is Johnny Cash for that matter, and of course Hank Williams. But once you've got a good show, then to me it's almost like driving down the freeway at 65 miles an hour with the cruise control on. It
Yep.
doesn't take a lot of gas to continue the
Nope.
momentum. As long as you have your hands on the steering wheel and are directing where you're going and are reasonably alert and attentive, you can cruise for as much gas as you have in the tank.
That's right. It's really true. And once you build up a clientele where you've just got regular, I had one that paid very well that I was set up every, well, once a month, every month for a year. They'd book me out a year straight. So, I was busy all the time as much as I wanted to be.
And I
And
think
when you get to that point, it's really a sweet thing.
it is a sweet thing. I think one of the real advantages of this kind of gig, as I said, is that they want people that are consistent, that are sober, they're going to show up and do a good job. And it
Yep.
sounds like you tailored your entire show to exactly what this audience wanted.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's easy because you know, the music is good music. The jokes are corny but funny, and they can tell I'm having a great time doing it because I do, and that's a lot of it too. It's not a job for me; it's fun. I just get paid for it. But the other thing is you've got to have some decent equipment too. You can't just show up with, some old beater. I mean, you can, but you won't get back too often. Uh, for me, honestly, it was kind of a good excuse to buy equipment sometimes because I'm got a bit of the gas problem, and
Would
but
you please
I
tell
just
our
real
audience, for the uninitiated, what does gas mean?
gear acquisition syndrome.
Yes, yes. I don't know too many of us. In fact, I've got a brand new Electro Voice speaker, an Everse 8, that is charging as we
Oh,
speak. So I can go out and play shows and I don't even have to have battery power. I did a
nope.
funeral in East Texas a month or so ago that it would have been nice to have that. But yes, gear acquisition syndrome affects each of us. And I'll tell you what, let's do. We're gonna wrap up. This will be the end of episode 1. We'll get back here in just a second and we'll do episode 2 because I want to talk about gear and I want to talk about a few other things that are specifically aligned with being a solo performer, particularly someone like yourself who came into it from a different background that just decides I'm going to do this and I'm going to do specific solo gigs. So you've been listening to my buddy Brad Richard. My name's Riley Wilson, and thanks for listening to this part 1 of my podcast with Brad Richard. We're grateful that you listen to us and appreciate your sharing this podcast with others. If you like what you hear, again, share it and download with others. Until next time, I'm Riley Wilson for the Band of One podcast. See you then.